or I let the audience just work to hear them. And I treat some of my solo work as if I'm accompanying.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it has brought a certain kind of a deliberate passivity, a deliberate background feeling to the solo work, because this whole idea about a soloist being a kind of 19th century phenomenon, you know, with hair everywhere and a temperament to match, is actually, it's not the truth. I think most pianists they're a combination of introvert and extrovert.
Mm-hmm.
They're often quite academic. They're often quite emotional as well.
Right.
They're a combination of elements, and I think they've been too much made out. You know, soloists have been too much into foreground people, and not enough into these sort of more retrospective, quieter types of sound. So I think that's the way forward for soloists.
But obviously, so that brings more shade and dark and more texture to your playing.
Yes, I think it does, and perhaps even more of an awareness of certain composers when they don't particularly want you to project a line. They're just, you know, some pieces written to be played for solo piano aren't necessarily projected works, are not necessarily loud extrovert pieces of work. Right. And I think it's easier when you've been an accompanist to present things without bringing all that soloistic baggage, and just sit down as if you were accompanying or improvising and produce a quieter sound. One lives and learns, and there's always more to learn, and there was always more to go through or to live through. Everything is learning, and you would be stupid to sit on a high horse and say, right, I know everything there is to know, and this is what I do for a living. And I think that musicians that assume that stance, they'll get nowhere fast, because everything is learning. You change all the time, you learn more, you keep learning, and hopefully as you keep learning, in ways you improve, and people will want to work with you. If you don't, you know, retain a stance on anything or an opinion that isn't moving with the times. And you have to be honest as well, that there's more and more to learn, and you can never sit down and say, I've learned it all.
But of course, it's not just learning about the instrument or learning as a musician or a singer. I think this kind of continuous learning also helps you develop as a human being.
Yes,
it helps
definitely.
Your spiritual growth, and do you not find, do you think?
I do. I think because if somebody were to come and work with me and they sensed that I had closed the doors on certain ideas, or that I had opinions and I wasn't shifting from them, I think I wouldn't get any more work for a start. I think that the world is changing so fast, and you have to accept and grow with it, and if you don't, you'll be left behind, and you know, there's so much more to learn in the music world, and that's something I embrace, and I look forward to. I look forward to change. I like fusions of styles. I like different types of music, and I like those things too. I like to move with those things and develop as I go. So the next challenge is, when you've been there, you've done that, you've accomplished your first stage as a musician, as a vocalist. You've been trained in a certain idiom, you know how to deliver things in that idiom, you've got your techniques lined up.
Right.
You may be in your 20s, 30s, 40s, it doesn't matter, but you've gone down that path, you've followed all the rules, and then you bottom out, because nothing stops, does it?
Right.
You know, you don't have a plant that grows and then when it reaches like 2 feet, when it's supposed to be about 6 foot, it doesn't stop there and go, right, I don't know what to do next.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think there's got to be an organic link that the human being requires, that the musician requires to go on to the next stage. And that's the challenge. The challenge is, do you go on into the next stage and jump out of this little... area where you're really happy, where you get your work, you might even get paid an enormous amount for it. And that's how people know you.
Yes, and it's safe.
And it's safe, and you know what you're doing, and it's repertoire you've done. Or do you say, right, I'm discontented now. I've been there, I've done that. What else am I supposed to be doing? Why do I feel discontented?
Yes.
And of course, that's the challenge of the next stage, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's the scary bit.
That's extremely scary, because I think that's when most people stop. So they just say, right, okay, I think I'll teach now. Or I think I'll just get hired for a certain idiom and I'll sing or play in that idiom and I won't go on any further because I'm not supposed to. But if you look in yourself, if you really look in yourself, you'll find you haven't stopped growing, so why should your music stop growing?
Right.
You are craving something else. It's like you don't eat the same stuff like 20 years down the line as you did when you were 10. Things change, things organically change, the requirements change, your own musical needs change, and there's a little voice inside you that says, I need to go on, and I need to go on to the second stage. And personally, I think the second stage is to do with authenticity. It's to do with, right, I want to sound like myself. I don't want to sound like anybody else I've encountered. I want to find myself. It's a quest. It's a human quest, isn't it?
Exactly. And then you have to look inside.
Yes.
For that.
Yes. And there, in that little chamber, chamber of exploration, you will meet yourself.
Yes.
Do any of us want to do that?
Terrifying.
Probably not.
No.
A bit of us wants to, but the cost is going to be quite high. You've got to be very brave to do that, haven't you? You've got to steel yourself. You've got to have a lot of courage and say, right, I'm ready to face myself.
That's a tough one.
I think it is. So I think the quest for authenticity is to do with facing your own demons, and those would be considerable, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. Yes.
And who wants to do that? Yes. I mean, who would elect to do that?
Mad musicians.
Most people in ordinary jobs don't do that. But if you're driven by your art, you have to. You look at all artists in all fields, and the ones who go on, who get through that kind of watershed, are going on into different stuff, and they are facing those demons head on. They're facing their own weaknesses, their own strengths, and they're looking for their own sound. And once they found their own sound, once they found themselves in their own sound, everybody else has found them too, because there's something in the sound then that they produce that hooks into what everybody wants.
That's true,
as opposed to just superficially giving, performing in a certain way, under somebody else's diktat. So when you hear somebody who's definitely coming from their core, they've been through that.
Yes.
They've been through that challenge.
And once you have the courage and the bravery to look inside yourself, to face your demons, to face all the things that we don't normally get a chance to look at for ourselves, and go past that and beyond that, that's when you start creating real art that really, really touches people, because something happens when you are true to yourself that translates to other people.
Yes, that's a good word.
Do you not think?
Yeah, I think it does translate to other people, and they can feel authenticity, can't they?
It kind of resonates.
Yeah. Well, I think because everything's lined up. So you can almost, if you can't see it, you can feel it.
Right.
That the person is lined up with their real self.
Yes.
There isn't a dislocation between what they are trying to put out to the world and what they're feeling inside. There isn't that kind of
divide,
like a bad pair of specs. There's that head-on thing, and the world receives it as such. So it's an interesting thing that one has to do, or else just give up. That option is always open.
Yeah, but like you said, if you're an artist and you're driven, and it is a drivenness, isn't it? It's not something that, I mean, nobody in their right minds would sometimes want to do the kinds of jobs we do. I mean, you know, you hear about artists before they go on stage, how ill they are with nerves.
Absolutely. But you know, these people in their sort of midlives who retreat, they disappear. I can think of lots of pianistic examples. I can think of vocal examples. I can certainly think of people who've done that, and everybody says, where are they? Where are they?
Yes.
Where have they gone? Yeah. Well, what they've done is they've just thought, to hell with this.
Yes.
They retreated into a cave and come back years later, and you hear a much stronger artistic personality.
Right.
Either that or they disappear.
Yes.
And you and I know who all those people are, but it's very interesting. They don't, I think they just go to kind of lick their wounds sometimes because they've had too much of one type of music and not been allowed to be themselves in their music.
That is often the case, isn't it? In fact, you were talking earlier about Shirley Bassey and a show you saw on television about her, and how wonderful it is that now, in her 70s, she's come out with a completely different sound in a way, but it's still her.
It's a much more authentic, all-rounded personality in the sound, a much more gifted interpretation, I think, and a much more lined up interpretation of a wider variety of things than what she was doing before. But that kind of retreat into a kind of introverted cave where people say, where's she gone? Is sometimes a reassessment. It's a period of reassessment and regrowth. And the person who merges later, I think, is interpretatively stronger. And I can think of, like, Martha Argerich, the pianist, who, again, a nervous type, nobody knew she was, quite nervous, comes back and really wows people with the depth and the insight that she's piled on during those years where nobody's seen her or heard of her for a very long time. And I don't think it's just going back to the drawing board. I think it is going back to yourself.
Right. That makes absolute sense to me, actually, because as artists, that's what we do all the time anyway. But I do understand what you're saying, that there comes a point where you've done it, you've done the techniques, you've done all the styles, you understand the academic stuff that's been pounded into you, and now you have that experience to build on and to make things far more organic.
Yes, and perhaps unique as well.
And unique, yes, absolutely.
Because if you're truly finding your own voice, then nobody else will be the same.
Yeah.
Whereas in your earlier life, you might have come across as a clone. And
Which
I
is
think
what we all do.
We can all say that.
Yeah.
At some point, we've sounded like clones.
Because you fall in love with a certain singer or whatever, and you want to sound like them. And I think everybody does that. And I know certainly of singers who, when they learn new repertoire, find singers that they admire, who happen to sing those songs, and then copy it.
Yes. And then at a certain point in your artistic development, copying is not what you want to do anymore.
Exactly. That's very, very interesting. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. That's wonderful.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to The Sound Bath. Join us again next time when we'll have more stimulating glimpses into the worlds of music and words.